You know, I have habitually kind of introduced messages by a text or by a subject, but I chose a little bit different way today, even though you will see I will always end up at the same place. But if one were to follow the history of philosophy, and I would tell you, if you've gone through any educational process, you've had, if that was your field, you had to at least know the nuts and bolts of it. And within that field, it's kind of a very sad, linear approach through time. In the 5th century BC, a man named Diagoras was the first one to criticize religion and mysticism, casting, not that he was the first one ever, by the way, but first documented with enough substance behind him. And as you move through time, through the Middle Ages, for example, at the height of scholasticism, things like not believing, agnosticism, which, by the way, comes much later, although agnosticism existed then, the term had not been coined yet. That comes later. And atheism, although both existed, they existed in a very small percentage because even the populace, uneducated as they were raised in the realm of the fear of God. As you move through to the Renaissance period, the likes of people like Machiavelli and others introduce the shadow of skepticism. I'm referring primarily to faith in God. Does God exist? Is it possible to know and understand about God? And so on. You move into the 17th century forward, 17th and 18th century, you've got the likes of David Hume, who was really one of the first destructive forces in the body of works produced, whose vehement arguments against miracles, and in fact, if one traces back the late Dr. Gene Scott's arguments of miracles cannot occur because they don't occur, therefore they can't, that's traced back to David Hume. If you do any study in any of that was he argued in circles, although he gave linear arguments, that became the circular argument that miracles cannot occur, they do not occur. Anyone who says that they do, it's an impossibility. And giving the rationale and reason for why they cannot, therefore they must not, therefore they don't. And into the 20th century, existentialism, that's a good tongue twister, say it 5 times. Things that were later developed like humanism, although humanism was really a product put out there by the likes of Moore and others. It was truly developed into its kernel crystal thinking of what it is now. So it's kind of sad when you look at how supposed thinkers, what does philosophy mean, supposedly the love of learning or wisdom, kind of had its apex, its highest point for those searching for truth in the Middle Ages, even though those were not good times overall, but in the Middle Ages, those who actually took, if they could receive the truth of God's word, the Bible was not questioned as to whether or not it was an authentic document or whether or not it was representative of God's words, but it was, and people had the fear of God. So it's kind of a tragic thing that we look on a timeline. And 2 branches that come out of philosophy that are probably more modern, although they have existed forever, I'm sure, are the subjects of atheism and agnosticism, both stemming from Greek words, which puts it in reverse, not, Gnostic, which we get our word gnosis, knowledge, to know, so not knowing, agnostic, which I just said was coined by a man named Thomas Huxley in about somewhere in the 1870s, and really not based on the way we view it now, not the way we view agnosticism now, but he viewed it in terms of the early church, the Gnostics of the early church who claimed to know everything, and he looked at these very same things and could only see his ignorance. Therefore, he supposedly is the father and coined that term agnostic. Atheism, the same thing, putting a in front, which negates from the Greek, and theism from the Greek word theos, that means no God. And under these categories, under these two categories, there's subcategories. And there are so many subcategories. If you were studying or taking a course on philosophy, you would probably be forced to have to at least learn some of the basics, which they can drive you crazy. I categorize them as simplistically as I could just to tell you that there are subcategories. It's not just simple, you're either an atheist or you're an agnostic. There is atheism, positive atheism, which is God does not exist. Negative or weak atheism, which falls short of concluding and leans more towards agnosticism in a branch of argument if you were going to try and figure out, is this one pot? There is the epistemological argument for atheism, that is, people cannot know God or determine existence. This leads to another category called skepticism, as well as logical positivism, which says that all this is meaningless and unintelligible, which I happen to agree. I don't mean the subject of God, I mean the discussion philosophically regarding it. There is the metaphysical, which implicitly denies the existence of non-physical beings. The psychological and social. The psychological obviously was brought on by Freud, and the sociological one by the likes of people like Marx and Engels, who basically, well, let's go back to the psychological one. The psychological one essentially was that people create the need to believe in a God, which basically is a fabrication to pacify their wants or needs. And the social one is that those that imply that there is a God, it's only to enslave the masses and to keep them under a certain type of reign, for which if they, there's a whole thought process that goes down that way. So you've got those are the primary ones. And finally, there is the axiological, which is that humankind, which is basically like humanism, humankind possesses all of the answers that it needs. An answer for every solution, every problem, there is a solution. You'll find it, humans have it. And therefore, there is no need for God because God doesn't exist. This is that whole circle of things. In agnosticism, there is also a similar category. So don't just think one size fits all. If you thought somebody said, I'm an agnostic, next time say, yeah, what kind? Tell me. Agnosticism, obviously, is the nature and existence of God is unknown, inherently unknowable. Therefore, anything related to or pertaining to the subject must be subjective on the part of the individual, but cannot be proved. We cannot know it. Not possible to have absolute or certain knowledge of the existence or non-existence of God. Here are the subcategories. There is what is called strong agnosticism, which is God is unknowable. One cannot verify whether God exists. We'll put this in the epistemological. You can line these two up side by side and do the same thing for atheism as you can for agnosticism. This would be the epistemological category. Mild agnosticism, which might be labeled more as empirical, which is existence or non-existence of God is not known, but not necessarily unknowable. Here, one withholds judgment. That's why I said there are subcategories. So next time somebody says they're an agnostic, you can get them right here. They may not know, they may be agnostic about their own agnosticism. Did you like that one? Because I did. There is pragmatic agnosticism, which is there's no proof of the existence or non-existence of God, which is very much like the first. Then you're going to like this one. There is agnostic theism. I know. claim to not know the existence of God, but still may have a belief in such an existence. That's like, the jury's not in, so until I don't know what I don't know, therefore I won't make a conclusion. That is theism, agnostic theism. There is agnostic atheism, which says, I don't believe in God because we cannot know, therefore there's nothing. So when you think about this, and I'm putting this out here for a reason, both of these categories would not argue with the statement I'm going to make. If they did, they'd probably be a little crazy. Everything is transitory. There is nothing that is staying the same. Everything is moving. You are a mass of cells, and although you appear to be solid and staying still, there's stuff moving around, in and around you. You're sitting there and you're moving, and I'm talking about your cell structure now, okay? Some of you are going, oh yeah, I feel that way too. Talking about your cell structure. It's a huge problem because however you believe we are brought into this world, the one thing that will not be argued is that a child that is born will grow. A healthy, normal child will grow and become a young adult, which will become an adult, which will become a middle-aged person eventually, which will become a senior citizen, which eventually will die. And that is transitory right there on its face. There's nothing that's staying the same, albeit that the earth, here's another one for you, that don't think that I'm fence-sitting. I'm trying to make a point without getting into the minutia of the other arguments. The people that argue that the planet is changing, that the climate is changing, that everything else is changing. But the one thing that hasn't changed is that people are still coming into the world, living and dying, and the earth is still here, however old you want to date it. And it too is transitory for a time. The Bible says the earth will be eventually burnt up and a new earth will be created. But until that time, we are the most transitory. We are, we'll call it evolving through life. We are maturing, supposedly. Most of us are anyway. And eventually returning to dust. And the planet is still here. Ages and eons. And I believe in creation, that God created. He spoke. And out of nothing came everything. And since that time until the now, including the gap in Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, which includes a period of recreation, man has been in a transitory state immediately after or during, after the fall. If man was created to be with God and not have a transitory state, the fall definitely guaranteed that we are changing. But the earth, regardless of whatever the claims are, it's still here. Go ask Voltaire. Go ask Russell. Well, you can't. They're dead. Now, what remains of those people? Their writings. The writings remain. The lips that uttered them have been silenced. Maybe the ink that once, the hand that once held the pen that had the ink is now in book form. But the one thing that has remained is the things that they have said or claim to have said. Those things remain. And some, unless you said something, you made a contribution that made a mark on society and humanity. Many who were the not known, the unknown, not the Russells, and not the Humes, and not the Engels, and not the Nietzsches, not those people, but a plethora of unknown people who did not leave their mark, and although they left a written account, and they left a written study, and they left written works, they're forgotten. So these few that have left their mark, some of them are quite despicable in our history for the things that they've done. Some are great achievements which will be long remembered. But the fact is that the things that remain long after the individual is gone, and we're talking about a scant few, might be the things, except for this last generation technologically speaking, will be the things that they wrote down that were preserved for a future generation to study, such as myself. I had to go through a whole pile of philosophy, which, of course, I just spared you the gory details of what it's like, because you can pull your hair out trying to have to read and even process what some of these people said is ridiculous. However, that's part of what you have to do. Written down, reduced into book form, and as I said, it's just a select few. The point is, those individuals, transitory, what they left behind, the core of what they left behind, their work, but eventually, let's just give the earth, hypothetically, another 100 years, maybe another 150 years, maybe. If we took all of these great contributors and sifted it down, there might be a 1% or 2% that remains as studied, as acknowledged, as they lived, as they were here and had their being. And that's very small if you consider the massive amount of people who have lived and died in the interim from that time, from the time that they existed to the time, the future time I'm discussing. And why am I saying that? Because I'm not going to engage in apologetics. I'm not going to try and get an audience out there to try and believe and say, yes, the Word of God is true. There are people who will vehemently deny that the Bible is God's Word, and they'll say it's a collection of good stories. But what has remained has been the Word of God. What has remained that has endured, which has not been transitory, regardless of mankind's interference. And I say that God deigned, God designed that His Word would be put into every tongue for all people to be able to read and understand. But regardless of the frailty and the shortfallings of those, whether they were influenced by doctrine or by institutions or simply by their ignorance, but God's Word has remained. The one thing that through the eons of time, and even if you're one of those people who will be a hardhead and say, well, how do I know? Well, the one thing we know is we've got, I'm not arguing for the verity. I'm not going to engage in politics. I'm simply saying we've got fragments and documents that go back quite far to say that further back than most documents and most philosophers and most writing and most contributions, the extent and nature of the Bible as it exists, as the Word that has remained, is quite a treasure trove in comparison to all of the other things that have been left in writing, intelligible writing, through the eons of time. Now, people may argue that, and people may say, well, you know, because you're a person who is a person of the book. Well, I'll tell you this. The reason why I put out all this information about those who fall into these different categories is there's one thing that these individuals will not and could not, even if they were alive today, they could not argue with, which is that very little of their writing, in terms of the populace of people who have written and contributed, will exist, does exist, although there's a vast body, but will exist or continue to exist as much in the degree that the Word of God has continued and has been propagated, and albeit, as I said, in the hands of frail and fallen human beings, touched and messed with, has still endured, which means that there is good reason for us as creatures, and we're subject to outside forces, to take a look at and understand the transitory nature, ours, and the things that endure. And interestingly enough, whether one says, well, I don't believe in God and I don't care to believe in God, just weigh out what I just said. While there were many back there in the 17 and 1800s that came out of that group of philosophers who were atheists, and they said, give this thing 25 years, and once the enlightened mind comes to some understanding, the Bible will disappear into the oblivion where it should be. And yet, this book is heralded as the best-selling book of all time still today. Don't care if you want to count all the charlatan evangelists out there with batting eyelashes and eyebrows that can produce more books supposedly written by them in 1 year than Carter used to have liver pills. I don't think they make those anymore. But the point is, nothing will match this book in all of the translations and versions and languages that it has been distributed in over the face of the planet, over and beyond any philosopher arguing for whether or not this is true. The Bible, I'm referring to God, the existence of God in the Bible. That being said, I turn in the Bible to look at something which, for those of us who would even care to make some type of comprehensible thought process, I ask you if you would to open your Bibles to 1 Peter, first chapter. We'll start there. Beginning at verse 22, he says, "Seeing ye have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit, unto unfeigned, that is unhypocritical, love of the brethren." That is the phileo word for love. "See that you love agape one another with a pure heart fervently." I taught on that too. That word for catharize doesn't mean that you make it pure. It means that Christ said you are clean, you are made pure, clean through the word. As long as the word is abiding in you, that thought process should settle down that the catherization, the removal of things, is his work on his part as long as we remain in the word. "Seeing ye have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit unto unfeigned love of the brethren, see that ye love one another with a pure heart fervently, being born again," I taught on this before, "not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible, by the word of God, the Logos of God, which liveth and abideth forever. For all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man as the flower of grass. The grass withereth, and the flower thereof falleth away, but the word of the Lord," here it's the rhema of the Lord, "endureth forever. And this is the word which by the gospel is preached unto you." Now, as I started looking at this, there's two things that came into my mind. One is because of the abundant stuff that's out there. A lot of it turns to the metaphysical, and a lot of it turns to the help yourself. But the reality is there are two things being pointed out here that are abundantly clear: the transitory nature of all things which pertain to this earthly state we are in. And I don't care if you're an atheist, an agnostic, if you're a Jew, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Christian, the transitory nature of the here and now, where we're at, as we live, as we breathe, as we have our being, us, our earthly state, versus the endurance or the durability of what comes from above. Now that, I'm not even going to make into an argument, because there'd be those that say, well, how do I know? Those are the agnostics. In whatever category you pick, they would say, well, how do I know? Because I can't know, because I don't know. Therefore, if I can't know and I don't know, and there's no way for me to really know, I can't go there. Now let me ask you a question, which is really rhetorical. For an individual who's maybe not so familiar with the Bible, it seems to me that there's a whole lot about that which comes from above, that which is implanted into the heart of man, both Old and New Testaments, which talk about God changing the heart of stone and putting a new heart. David talked about, put a clean heart in me. Everything about something changing the inner being of the person. And void of this transaction that happens on the part of God interacting with fallen man, man cannot help himself. I use man generically. Humankind cannot help itself. Humanism said, you can fix the problem. Do enough good, be good enough. You do it, and you are able to fix it. You can fix your own problems. The problem is we're void of being born from above, which is the very essence of what Jesus spoke of with Nicodemus. It didn't matter how good Nicodemus was as a religious, pious Jew, without being born from above, this new, living, abiding way, it didn't matter. And you can't, I'm sorry, you can't substitute. This is why this subject in this series has been so important. and will continue to be important for as long as anyone is interested in why these things ought to be studied more carefully. Void of someone being born from above, the best you're going to have is a manufactured surface desire to achieve and to accomplish, even that thinking salvation can be won on a superficial level, which is why we've said here altar calls, although I'm sure it feeds the ego of the minister. I can find no rationale, nothing that fits within the confines of this book, to every single week ask someone if they have accepted or will receive. Because the fact of the matter is, if you don't have the receiver, you're not going to be here, and your interest is not here. And I don't care how much you might say, wow, I'm pretty messed up, but if that prevenient work, which clearly is done first and foremost by God, sending His Spirit to get the soil ready for the planting of the seed, which is this very seed which He talks about, incorruptible seed being planted into the heart of man. Unless all of that happens, everything else is useless. And you've got, even within Christendom, you've got people who would absolutely pass over this subject and tell you, you don't need this. And I'm going to tell you, as a fundamental, absolutely, you cannot even begin to understand, nor can I, the things which God has designed for us until the activity and action of God plants that seed, which is not a seasonal seed, that is planted by God in the heart of man. Otherwise, people say, well, how come I talk to people and they don't seem to change. In fact, they're the same rotten apples I knew 20 years ago. Well, first of all, I'm nobody's fruit inspector, neither are you. Judge not. In case some of you out there, especially the ones who like to judge, in case you forget what the Scripture says, Matthew 7 is very clear. To the measure that you want to judge, this is the exact measure, you will be judged. We're not to judge. You say, well, what about this person who's like as crabby as they were 20 years ago? They say they're this and they say they're that. The only thing I would say to those individuals, not to you who lament, to those individuals, is maybe God's work is a little bit slower with you, but you wouldn't be hanging on inside the church for 20 years, even as your brother says you're a rotten bad apple or you're still as grumpy as ever, but you wouldn't be hanging on for 20 years if the Spirit of God hadn't taken a hold of you. You'd be saying, why do I need this? And you'd be gone. See, there's only so much superficial stuff you can put out for a time. This is the other problem. When people begin to judge, I remember I told you the story about this supposed famous evangelist who's now fallen and disgraced, who asked the question and asked if I was even saved. Well, let me tell you something, friends. You don't endure the amount of stuff that I've been through in ministry if it isn't that your hand is firmly planted to the plow, and regardless of what comes your way, you recognize the prize in front of you is infinitely greater than all the clods that might be turned up and even come back at your heels. And that the price that Jesus paid to free me from the pit of hell, His shed blood that washes and cleanses, and only His blood, not the forgiveness and pardon of your brothers and sisters, not of a priest, not of a rabbi. That clarity and that ability to stay the course is not a tenacious spirit, which I do have. It's called the Spirit of God that lives in an individual, recognizing the thing that will endure after all of the stuff that is slung at me and has been for these many, many years. There's only one thing that's going to endure: the Word of God. Not only the Word of God from this book, the Word of God that has been preached here, out of the mouth of Dr. Scott, not because it was him, because he preached the Word of God. Many cannot make that distinction. Don't follow a man or a woman because you like him. You follow a man or a woman because they are following Christ. And the only way for you to know that they're following Christ, they're people of the Word and of the book. And anything else that contradicts that word or book, they're not interested in. I'm not interested in people approving me. I'm not interested in pleasing you. That's the flesh. The Spirit says, my Lord and Savior died for me. I will engage in the things I must engage in, because the same man who wrote these words here, inspired by the Holy Spirit, also reveals something really great, which is we are partakers of his suffering, and not just his suffering, but the glories that shall follow. That the trials that we go through, they're only for a time, but you cannot endure those trials without this event happening, being born from above, not of corruptible seed. I'd like to ask, and the design is rhetorical, but the heart of it is crucial. Like the Galatians, some have begun here in the Spirit. And Paul asked, are you so foolish? You've begun in the Spirit? Do you think you're going to be made perfect and come to the completion of this race in the flesh? It's not going to work that way. Well, God will look on my efforts to make it there. I limped in, by goodness, I limped in, and I got there. It don't work that way. My faith will take me through, and not faith in faith, my faith that Christ, who has already conquered death and hell, has also opened the gate for me and for you, that we make our transition by faith. It's all by faith. That faith begins from being born from above. The thing that we look at, lots of people would like to talk about, the Word of God, which liveth and abideth forever. I refer back for a minute to that liveth and abideth forever, because that saying that spanned the top of the church downtown, forever, O Lord, thy word settled in heaven, Psalm 119, verse 89, is not just about the Word or the words we read out of the Psalms, but the Word himself. Christ said, I in them, in other words, putting himself as he and the Father are one, and desiring for us to be one with him. They are in me and I am in them. And so what I'm saying to you is, here is something that has durability to it. And here is what is transitory. For all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man as the flower of grass. That means all, not some flesh, not a portion of the flesh, but all flesh. I taught on this many years ago when I was teaching through 1 Peter, and I said straight the first time, this is not a passage referring to the mortality, essentially some morbid, it may have a morbid tone that we're all going to die, but that's not the insinuation of the passage. This is a direct quote out of Isaiah 40, where the prophet is saying, comfort ye the people. Why? Because right in that passage, there is a declaration that is looking ahead as a great prophecy to John the Baptist, who would herald, who would announce the one coming. And not only that, if you think about it, by the time Christ came, he came to a land that was already withered spiritually. It was already withered spiritually. It was no longer alive. Religion had taken on its deadest form through the law. And the law was a schoolmaster until the coming of Christ. He came into a withered land. The grass is withered, the flower fadeth away or falleth away. And there had to be a withered spiritual state before God could make alive. Go back and you read in Deuteronomy, and in Deuteronomy it says essentially this: He kills, the Lord, He kills and He makes alive. He wounds and He heals. Not for us to understand anything anywhere except the meaning of that is that God will first cut down before He plants. He'll tear down. There's another passage in Isaiah I could quote from, the same thing. Jeremiah actually talks about the same thing, and Ezekiel talks about the same thing. But in that passage out of Deuteronomy, he says, I kill and I make alive. That is before there is going to be any form of understanding spiritually. We are essentially, and all of us are found in the same state. And if you want to think about it that way, you just need to go right back to the beginning of Genesis. And the creation, it was exactly like that. Until the Lord spoke precisely of what He willed to have happen, where there was just darkness and seemingly, we'll call it a little bit of chaos, because that was a recreation period. But until He spoke definitively for light to be, there was none. And so before there could be light, there was just darkness and probably chaos and confusion. Those two Hebrew words, tohu and vabohu, we tend to kind of gloss over and think, oh, that's just in the creation. No, that's in all of humanity. Until the Spirit of the Lord looking down and then, of course, breathing His breath into us. We are just like Christ coming into that withered spiritual land. There is nothing good in us. There is no spiritual life in us. There is no ability to comprehend or grab hold of, void of this act of being born from above. All flesh is grass. Grass has, just as plain as day here, I like the fact that flesh and grass are being compared. Why? Because you don't go out there and massage the lawn or the grass. You don't go out there and say, I'm going to give it a little. Flesh is grass, and what does He say? The grass withereth. He doesn't say just a little bit. And unfortunately, this is, when I read this, I think to myself, we're talking about something that must happen, the necessity of something happening to each and every believer. Now, it happens perhaps at different times, in different ways, as each of us is unique in our crisis, in our situation, in our living, but all the same, Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There isn't one person who can stand and say, not I. Therefore, shut your mouth and stop being an accuser of the brethren and doing Satan's bidding of trying to accuse everybody else of their sins, because the greatest sin you commit is being one of a Pharisee by opening your mouth. Even Jesus talked to these people who were about to stone the woman, taken in the very act, and said, okay, anybody who's without sin, go ahead. Where were they? He says, where are they, thine accusers? They all left. Okay, got to do this. In the moment where we're very serious here, I got to tell you the story again because I think you forgot it. I was at a place, some guy who professed to know Dr. Scott, this is after Dr. Scott got promoted, professed to know Dr. Scott, and there was probably 5 different preachers there. They were all going to go on and speak, and I was standing off to the side, and he said, telling me about Dr. Scott, how much he loved Dr. Scott. And then he said, I'll be right back. He had to go and deliver this, 5 or 10 minute homily or whatever he was going to do. And we had a very straight-faced conversation until I heard him say what he said. And then when he came back, I had to excuse myself. I couldn't look at him, could not be in his presence because I would have started laughing. Because he used that text about the woman taken in the very act, and there was a whole build-up, 5 minutes worth of, now can you imagine the scene as all the men gathered around and they all had their rocks in their hands. Wait, because if that's not bad enough, he said something else that was just like, wow, I can't believe he just said that. And he said, and the woman must have been weeping and shaking, and then Jesus spoke, and at the sound of the words that rolled off the master's tongue, they all dropped their rocks. And then he came back and he said, And I just said, I'm sorry, I got to go. I don't know what you're going to do with that, so I got to go. Not that I was thinking anything carnal. It's the way he delivered it just made a mess out of everything. Don't go there. Back to the grass that withereth. It doesn't say the flower just loses its petals just a little bit. But the flower falls away. The flower, the glory of man. That means a man's, again, generically, man or woman. A man's, it says, all the glory of a man as the flower of the grass. That means money, wisdom, rich, poor, it doesn't matter. All the things that are we'll call them the figurative icing on the person's life, what they can amass, whether it be in knowledge, academic learning. It doesn't matter. It's all put into the same camp here. The flower thereof falleth away. This is why I lined up all of these different, specifically emphasizing the tragedy of those who would say it can't be proved or it doesn't exist, because the reality is, the one thing we can know is that these people existed and they do not exist anymore. And the only thing that's remained, as I said, is a small percentage, is the word, written word they left. There was no technology beyond that at that time. And we can be certainly assured of what is said here. But the word of the Lord, the rhema of the Lord, endureth forever. So two things we can know: the word of God, which is the logos of God, which liveth and abideth forever, and the rhema, that is that spoken word, the things that we've quoted often, those repeated things that are of the word of God, the rhema of the Lord endureth forever. Taking these two things and putting them side by side, it becomes very clear that if we're just looking for, if somebody was just looking for a handle to jump in, I tell you, if I was skeptical, if I started out even skeptical, I'd much rather err, forgive me, and God forgive me for saying this, I'd much rather err on the side of saying this word that lives forever, this word that endures forever, and I know I will not, and the word that was in the beginning, that came in the flesh, that said, he that feeds on me shall live and have life everlasting. If I was still uncertain, would be a much better way to go than saying, and when you die, there's nothing. And there is no hope, and there is no guarantee, and there's not one to help you, and there's not one alongside, and there's no guidance, and there's no direction. You solved the problem. You came into this world by yourself, I guess. You're going to go out the same way. I don't know how you could come into this world by yourself in the humanistic way, but anyway, I guess anything is possible in the minds of some. But my point is, this text is wonderful in that it says there is a necessity for the Spirit to do His work on the flesh. And this is why I've been looking at all these different passages that reference the work, the withering work. It does not suggest that God comes riding his John Deere to chop down every blade of grass in the sight that he can see and chop, and it's all gone. Now it's all level. Now let's plant new seeds and start all over again. The idea here is that the thing that is the superficial, the thing that was not meant at this point to remain, must be worked on, but not by these brothers and sisters, not by these fruit inspectors, not by people who'd come to, as I said, as the accuser of the brethren. Their sole purpose in life is to remind you of the failure of your marriage, or the failure of your parenting skills, or the failure of whatever it is. Their sole purpose in life is to tell you how you are a messed up loser. And by the way, they profess to be Christians, but they actually do the bidding of the devil. Because I don't know about you, but my Bible tells me that what God creates in me and in you is a new creature. And he doesn't take an old vehicle and just say, well, we'll just put some new rims on it and then it'll be like new, right? See the cars in Cuba, those nice old cars, but if you open some of them have original parts and just barely run, and some of them are completely redone under the hood. I think some people think of God that way. The outside still looks good, but the inside, that's replaced with all new parts. That's not the way God does it. Although there's a new implantation, a new creature formed in us. That's what that passage means. And it doesn't mean that I will take the old and I will work on making the old into the new. It means I've placed my new life in you, and that new life in you, working in you, is going to help you with the old life. It's not going to improve the old life as in, now we'll eradicate all these things. Some people preach that. I do not. The old man is still there. The old woman is still there, fighting like the Dickens to get back in power and get back in control. And if that's not your fight, then come talk to me afterwards. I want to know your secret. If that's not your fight, isn't that the fight of every individual that comes? No, thank you. At least that's some of you that are saying, yeah, that's exactly what has to go on. In fact, the grass from my passage here is never revived. The flower, it doesn't say it will bloom again in season, may be so beautiful. You might say, shouldn't it be forever? And the answer is, this was not made for that. It might have been at the beginning, but it's not now. And the withering work of the Spirit is to show, like a mirror, of what I just did today. We can come up with all the great ideas and all the great philosophical thinkers of their day, but where are they? And as I said, it's a small percentage of writing, a body of writing, even though I think it's tragic, to see some of these who probably could have, who knows, what could have been, but they didn't come to the faith. They refused. The Bible says only the fool has said in his heart there's no God. And the reality is that when I look at this passage, I realize there is a work happening. And somebody says, well, you sure don't look like it. Well, who said I had to look like it? But more importantly, I can look at this and say there's something that will remain forever. And that is the Word of God, both the Logos, the Christ, the Logos, and the spoken, which is this word here. We're looking at it all as one package. It will remain. It does not change. And when I look at this, I realize the work that must go on in a believer's life, and it is ongoing. Withering doesn't happen in a day. The glory of the individual. We'll hold on to things as long as we can to say, well, don't take that away from me. I worked my whole life to have that. I was sitting and talking with some people this week, and it seemed like they were very, very concerned that anybody in the pulpit should have more than maybe $5 in their pocket. And my question was, of whose concern is that anyway? Of whose concern is that? What I said, by the way, we're just having this discussion. My thought process is there's a whole host of people who will raise money for this under the guise of it being something holy and something righteous and something good. And there's another group doing this, and there's another group doing that. Each one thinks that they are good and right in what they're doing. When the fact of the matter is there's only one thing that should be focused, which is, we'll call it the intent, especially of the New Testament. And the intent of the New Testament wasn't to mandate people for a tithe. It wasn't. There was never a mandate for that, although Paul, talking to the Corinthians, says, on the first day of each week, lay aside as each one is prospered. But there wasn't a mandate. Why? Because they gave it all away. They gave everything. So anybody who gets dogmatic about that in their own little pocket may have their agenda about it. But the reality is, if you're looking at the intent of what the New Testament writers were conveying, it was the Spirit of God makes an individual a hilarious giver. It makes them so much so, you're, by the way, being withered on by the Spirit because that flower that you worked so hard to get your life, and I'm talking about the flower out of my text, which is the glory, suddenly doesn't have the same ability and hold on you as it once did before this withering work began? Why is it that some people hold things, possession, money, even another day to live, and they hold it very loosely, versus others that you cannot pry $5 out of their hand, you can't get 5 hours of them to come and volunteer. They are as tight-fisted as this, and when it comes, by the way, those same individuals, when it comes to forgiving or loving, they're not just one-hand tight people. They got 2 hands holding on, and probably their toes are curled in their shoes saying, absolutely not. Those are the people, you're not going to know who they are necessarily, but they know who they are. There has been no withering work, and there has been no even attack on the glory of that individual's accomplishments. Because the reality is, as I said, there is only a few things in your life you'll come to conclude very rapidly, as I have in reading and studying this week. You know, the joy that I have of seeing Dr. Scott's work put in book form. And after this week, it became clear to me even more so. DVDs are wonderful. The internet's great. They're all wonderful tools. But all of those tools, sorry for all those people who'd like to say that everything can run by itself. No, everything actually requires that you pay for something and keep it going. But once you buy a book, you read that book, it really is, in this case, it's the preached word that won't change. And something in my spirit just said, you know, that's the beauty of this. While there's a whole sea of people, and I know some of you out there who earnestly depend on radio and the internet, those are all wonderful vehicles. But let me ask you a question. Do you have any books? I'm not talking about Dr. Scott's books. Do you have any books on your shelf at home? All that requires is you to get off your butt and take the book off the shelf. There's no power bill there. You can read it as many times as you want for your personal consumption. Enjoy it, revel in it, stare at it, put your feet up on it, which you can't do with other things. But it comes back to that which is incorruptible, indestructible, that will endure. Yes, they did it, by the way. They did it to Martin Luther. They tried to throw away and burn all of his books, and look where that got those folks who tried. Didn't work. Because what was contained in the books, the content of what was in the books themselves, that could not be destroyed. It only took one person to have a copy or a plate somewhere, a printing press anywhere, to begin running those puppies again. Why? Because Luther was all about the Word of God that liveth and endureth forever. And as long as that is being heralded, I'm not interested in all these other things which I call very transitory. They may be very interesting, including my opening remarks of categories of people. They all may be very interesting, but there's only one thing that we need to latch on to and be mindful of and recognize of all the things that will fall away, that will fade, that will be worked on, that will be disappearing or fading in their appearance or in their enjoyment. But the one thing that will live and continue to abide is the Word of God. And this is why I stand here in this pulpit. It is why I'm preaching this message to you, because I really feel the wonderful hope in all of this is not about some terrible thing that must happen to the flesh and to all of the glory that we labor for, but a wonderful thing of entering into a rest in the knowledge of who we serve, that He has not changed, and that if we're going to take that position, every single promise in this book is better than any banknote or any money order or any credit that I could ever get here on earth, which is transitory. Lord, is it transitory? But is enduring, its durability is there. And my focus should be on that, your focus. Anyone who cares about, I'm using the word generically, the ministry of the word of the Lord. I'm not interested in the individual's voice or their appearance. Anyone who's concerned about that should be concerned, by the way, and I'm just going to put a footnote on this. There are interesting subjects that can be included as we preach. I've told you church history is one of them. I just included a little bit of philosophy. That's possibly another. But when was the last time you heard somebody lament the need to hear about the blood of Jesus Christ? When was the last time you heard somebody lament, oh, tell me about the resurrection of Jesus Christ? When was the last time you heard somebody say, whatever you do, I need to hear this message from the table of the Lord, which is very liberating from a world that has shackled and destroyed the meaning of the communion. Find me an individual like that who's more concerned about those which are the front and center core matters of Christianity, and not all this other stuff on the peripheral that people seem to be so frothing at the mouth to, tell me about this thing. Those are the people who Paul warns about. They'd like to be tantalized with endless genealogies and about things that serve, they're vain janglings that serve no purpose. Find me an individual that's concerned about hearing the message about Peter's failure and his restoration. Find me an individual that's interested in the final sacrifice of Jesus crying out from the cross, it is finished, or the glory and the preaching of his ultimate return. Find me those individuals, and I'll tell you those of whom the withering work of the Spirit has occurred and is in the process of, because those people care more about the Word that lives and abides forever, going out, and whosoever will, being able to receive. Whosoever will, whosoever can respond, Christ says, I will in no wise cast out. But find me those individuals, and I'll tell you, those are the ones on whom the Spirit has gone to work, because the cry of the Spirit is not about my wants and my needs, but it is the exaltation and glorification of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. All I can tell you is let the work, if it is even painful, be gloried in, that God cares enough and has condescended to us to begin that work, to bring us to the place ultimately he desires us to be, that we may ultimately one day be in his presence and enjoy the glorious wonder of being there in his presence together. That's my message. You've been watching me, Pastor Melissa Scott, live from Glendale, California at Faith Center. If you would like to attend the service with us Sunday morning at 11 a.m., simply call 1-800-338-3030 to receive your pass. If you'd like more teaching and you'd like to go straight to our website, the address is www.pastormelissascott.com.